I play this innocent game in like 2016. That data lives forever and ever. And over a decade later, it's being used with a technology that didn't exist at the time for an incomprehensible evil.
Hey everyone, I'm super excited to be talking to Dr. Rumman Chowdhury. She's a former leader of AI ethics at Accenture and Twitter. Remember Twitter? And recognized by publications like Time and Forbes as an absolute leading voice in how we use AI. Look, we all have our concerns with big tech, but she has actually been in charge of trying to make AI companies more accountable and been fired for it, which I think is a badge of honor. I really want to know what her biggest concerns around AI and big tech are right now, what stories about AI we need to reject, and if there's a responsible way to use this technology at all. It should be an amazing conversation. Let's jump in. Thanks so much for joining today. Really, really excited to have you. And maybe just to kick things off, I wanted to ask a broad question just around, what concerns you most around the state of AI right now?
Consolidation of power, lack of agency, which technically are two things that are really one thing, right? So fewer and fewer people hold more and more power, and we have less and less say about what's getting built and how it's being built and what it's being used for.
So when you say lack of agency, you mean as kind of consumers or users of AI, our, stake in this or ability to direct it?
Exactly. And, to be very explicit with it, it is overwhelmingly clear that people do not want AI in many of their consumer goods and products. They do not trust it. They understand what the technology is being used for and other use cases. They understand how their data is being used in ways that they've not approved of. So it's not really a disagreement with the fundamental technology. It's a disagreement with the power structures, right? So I think recently there's a poll everyone's talking about where I think it was like what 74, like some like really high percentage of people ranked the use of AI very, very low, aligned with people's sentiments on ICE. So that's been the running joke in tech that like, wow, we actually hate AI more than we dislike ICE, just like as a population in America, or like right around on par. And there's no love lost between the average American and ICE. So and this is just one in a series of many surveys that have been going on for years and years. And just to point to another one, there's been a Pew study that's been ongoing, and every year for the past few years, Americans' trust in AI systems has declined, and more people say that it will bring more harm than do good, which is like the very explicit thing they are responding to. That like more and more people believe every year that this technology will do more harm than good. So yeah, when I say agency, it is very clear that people don't want it, and yet all we are seeing are new AI launches.
Well, and that feels like, especially that Pew survey, it feels like to me more of an indictment of the power structure and of big
That's
tech
right.
than of the technology itself, right? It's saying we don't trust the institutions that are
That's right.
behind this. Yeah.
That is exactly correct. And again, people are very clear as to why, and that is exactly why. Sometimes CEOs interpret it, and Silicon Valley certainly interprets it as, oh, the average people doesn't understand what AI is capable of. I think they do understand what AI is capable of, and they're willing to say, yeah, this is like a cool toy, and maybe it can do some impressive things. I am not willing to give up my personal liberty and the rights of the people around me so that I can have a calendar agent, you know?
So with that in mind and the big tech perspective, I mean, one of the things that's interesting here is there's so much noise, there's so many voices, there's so many conflicting narratives about, you know, what AI can do, what it can't do, what the future looks like, how it's going to impact, people's lives and their livelihoods, and very different incentives from the actors behind some of these voices if they're trying to get you to adopt the tool or trying to sell their own services. And you and I both exist, within this ecosystem to some degree. But I'm curious if there's any particular narratives that you're hearing pushed by the creators of AI that you think are dangerous and that you specifically want to call out that we need to reject.
Yeah, the big one really is, well, there's two. One is just the general anthropomorphism of the technology. And frankly, I see that coming more from the quote unquote good guys, i.e., Anthropic, than I hear it coming from OpenAI. And I coined a phrase years ago in the days of narrow AI, called it moral outsourcing. And we're seeing moral outsourcing at play, right? The intent of using language that is humanizing of AI, like AI models are built as a design decision for it to speak to you and say things like, I feel, I think, I'm sorry, I understand, when it does not do any of those things, right? That is a specific design decision to anthropomorphize the technology. Number one, it alienates us, right, from connecting this tool as something that somebody has built, and it makes us think fearful of it because we think that it is this big scary super intelligent thing. But then also importantly for these companies, when an AI system goes wrong, they can conveniently say, and all the headlines say, AI model erases company database, versus saying this product failed, which is how
Right.
it would be stated in just about any other use case. If you had, a server and it caught fire, you wouldn't say server deletes data by spontaneously combusting. Like, it sounds so dumb, but that's how we talk about AI agents that take action, that have done things. Again, we blame this technology as simply executing a command, and maybe the command was poorly specified, or we haven't been able to like ring fence bad decisions. But and again, like Anthropic is particularly guilty of saying things like intent, manipulation. They have set up an entire team to look at the welfare of the AI itself, which is mind-boggling to me. And all of this is theater. It's theater.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting that Anthropic is doing it, of all people. And as you said, I mean, I think it's, at least from where we're sitting right now, yeah, I think the good guy moniker probably does apply more to them than everybody else. But why is that? Sorry, not why is it a good guy moniker? Um, why are they doing all these performative actions around AI? And I guess, I had a slightly different perspective, because when I see all this anthropomorphization of AI, to me, the motive is extremely clear. It's just to influence people's behavior and make it more
Mhm.
engaging and try to just
Yeah,
keep people using
absolutely.
the technology for longer. So, but why are good guys falling into this trap? Good guys in
Yeah, I
quotation
mean,
marks.
quote unquote good guys, right? Which I too use. I think it serves them very well, which goes to kind of the second thing that I think is the most dangerous thing being pushed. And it's actually a book project that I'm working on and something I've just gotten really interested in, which is this idea of intelligence, right? So they want us to believe that this thing that exhibits signs of sentience and will, according to their words, also is smarter and better than us at all of the things and will take over everything that we are doing. And really what is hidden under that narrative is, the slippery slope definition of AGI. If you ask the average person on the street what they think artificial general intelligence is, they'll probably point to a movie like Terminator or Her and be like, "Oh my God, what artificial general intelligence is this AI system that's able to interact just like a person." But then for those of us, which, and I think you've seen this too, there's been a slippery slope of what that's been defined as, and now it is only defined in economic terms. Like OpenAI was calling it the automation of all tasks of economic value, right? And why? Why identify? Because they want to make money. So it hides this profit, this like profiteering perspective, and it makes them seem like they are pursuing this noble mission for humanity and humanity's growth, rather than saying, oh no, we're just trying to automate the work people are doing so we can further consolidate wealth and power amongst ourselves.
If you work in IT, Infotech Research Group is a name you need to know. No matter what your needs are, Infotech has you covered. AI strategy? Covered. Disaster recovery? Covered. Vendor negotiation? Covered. Infotech supports you with the best practice research and a team of analysts standing by, ready to help you tackle your toughest challenges. Check it out at the link below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Maybe I'm just closer to it, but to me, it's extremely obvious that the motive is exclusively economic, right? It's just, how can you
Yeah,
own this platform under what everybody is doing and
that's
say, hey,
correct.
why would you hire employees when you could hire this employee replacement that we own?
Right.
And see, it's the same.
Right. And there's no, and to them there, it's like there's no messiness, right? There's no human messiness involved. Yeah, like Silicon Valley is such a weird place. So like tech people hate humanity. They hate dealing with people. And like some of it's, kind of funny. I used to joke that like especially in the 2010, like the 2000s and the 2010s, a lot of the startups that were built were kind of built to like avoid dealing with messy human things. Like I don't want to cook food, I'm going to get delivery. I don't want to drive myself somewhere. I don't want to do my laundry. So like that kind of startup of like automating the mundane human things. It's even in the language, right? Currently biohacking is sort of a big thing. I mean, it's a big thing kind of everywhere, but transhumanism, it all originates out of Silicon Valley. And like what is it specifically saying, right? It's specifically saying that like your human functions of like sleep, as an example, aging, or just being tired, these are inefficiencies. Like it's bad to be a human, and like can you get rid of that? So a lot of this, and you're 100% correct, is trying to create this AI workforce is like, god, I don't want to deal with like pregnant women and someone who's got to pick up their kids and like somebody who has a cold. Like it's annoying, right? People's feelings are annoying. Rather than seeing a lot of human messiness as a way of bringing value, which by the way it is, right? The institutional knowledge is a thing. There's a reason why you can't just like fire someone who's been at a company for 20 years or place them with a kid fresh out of a PhD program and assume they're the same. And it's going to be the same. And we're seeing the same for agents as well.
So I want to push on all of that a little bit. And by the way, I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah.
The piece I want to push on is there's a lot of emphasis there on the supplier side or the provider side of all these tools versus the consumer side.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's, troubling is the word I'll choose, is
Mhm.
that there does seem to be a lot of widespread adoption, both of AI, but, when you talk about all these like friction reducing apps that take away, the humanity in things, they've seen widespread adoption, right? Like that
Yeah.
demand is there. And so I'm curious what, if any, onus you put on, the consumer of these, and I don't know, like what does that ecosystem look like for you in a better world?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you're asking that question because I think a failure state is saying like the company has to do all of the things, and because they push back and say, well, the market doesn't say it's right. Meta, like Zuckerberg used to call it the privacy paradox. I think it was coined by him or by Meta at least, where like, they're like, okay, well, all of you advocates say people want privacy, but I overwhelmingly see that when I try to get people to use privacy, they don't want them. They just
Mhm.
want to be like, yep, permissions, moving on, right? And so there's two things. One is I actually think younger generations like are building in friction because they kind of want it. I think we are starting to kind of come full circle where, and I can just anecdotally tell you about a lot of like TikTok influencers, et cetera. I've seen their methods shifting over time from volume and easy to access to be more curated. So think of this as the difference between like how a lot of people are moving off of major social media platforms and moving into lots of like signal groups or Telegram groups or WhatsApp groups. It's kind of like, and that is more friction, right? I can sit there and passively just scroll and look at stuff that's, feeding me junk food, or I can be in like 30 different Signal and WhatsApp groups, which is way messier, but more rich. And I think we are kind of seeing people are understanding the value of that. But to your point, like traditionally, people just want things to make their lives easier. And in many cases, they are. And I do think there's an onus on the consumer. I think many of us have been saying for years and years and years, like protect your privacy. You never know what your data is going to be used for. And the pushback was always, I have nothing to hide. I think, we're in the finding out phase of all of that, where it's like, oh, you thought you had nothing to hide when you were playing Pokemon Go, but guess what? When you played Pokemon Go, that is now being used to generate the surveillance state. And it is a clear line. It's not an abstraction. So I think, people who have been hearing this story for years, for whom again, saying like you should protect your data was an abstraction, are now seeing how their data is being used because the lines are being drawn. And I'm curious to see, what sort of consumer protections pop up, which by the way, I'll also add one more thing. That's also why they're all trying to consolidate their power, right? They are trying to own the horizontal. What like Sam Altman funding, WorldCoin was not born out of some like, you know, good for humanity and like, because he realized that the technology that he has helped ushered in will completely erode trust. because the ability to create realistic deepfakes will get to the point where you will need biometric identification. So just the idea of WorldCoin and making people scan their biometrics was him collecting a database so that when he needs to own the privacy part of things, he gets to own that too. It's a horizontal that he's trying to build.
Right. He gets to profit off solving the problem that he himself is
Correct, that he
creating.
created, right, like coming
Yeah.
and going. Well, and also the investment in data centers, investment in minerals. One of the theories, I don't know how valid this theory is about like, trying to get Greenland was that there were specific rare minerals to be mined there that a bunch of the tech CEOs had invested in the startup that specifically was going to be based again like I don't want to like go into like red strings, but it's really hard not to in this space because many of our red strings have proven to be true.
Yeah. Well, and I've said in a lot of these conversations, we're not a political podcast, we're a technology podcast, but the line seems to get blurry and blurrier these days,
You
right?
can't, right, like you truly cannot, like one of our most infamous CEOs, Elon Musk held a pretty prominent position in the current administration. We know like they don't divorce technology and politics.
Mhm.
Why should we?
Yeah. I think that's well said. So I want to come back to this, the consumer side and people maybe not appreciating that, as you said, it's not abstractions. A lot of their decisions that we as consumers are making are being, they're creating the society that we have and that we're going to have. And so
Mhm.
if I can frame it up this way for you, if you were going to have a message to consumers saying basically, wake up, that this is what you need to know, what would be kind of your pithy message around what you want people to be focusing on right now?
Gosh, that's a good question. Hmm. Maybe it's just something very basic about just app hygiene and data privacy. Like just go into your phone, go into all of your settings and just maximize all of your protections. If you can afford it, get a VPN service. Like in our house, we have something called a Pi hole, which like plays a Raspberry Pi tool that blocks all the ads coming in. Like if you have the capability, just do it. Maybe I guess like my pithy way of saying it is explore the world of products, tools, and services that are now exploding around protecting your privacy, security, and data. Because there actually are a surprising number of things that have come up, especially in the last few years. Some of it requires a bit of tech skill, a lot of it does not. You just have to it's not going to be number one in the app store because these are not massive, big funded companies. It's literally like two friends who felt passionate about data protection, literally, or
Mhm.
it comes out of the Raspberry Pi community, which is largely open source and, built on subreddits. So I guess I'd say that like explore the world of things that have popped up to help you protect your privacy. It is on you, but you don't have to do it alone.
So just along those lines, I want to go back to kind of painting the picture of the importance of this. And you made an offhand comment about building the surveillance state, but I want to, just kind of, as I said, paint the picture of
Mhm.
why is this so important? Why is it so important to protect your privacy and your data? What are some of the malicious things that these organizations can be doing with it, and how do you see it kind of playing out for people in a negative way?
Yeah, and again, I think people have already seen so many examples play out. I was reminded of one of the very first talks I ever gave back in like 2017 about like sort of AI and ethics, and it was at SurveyMonkey, and this is in Atlanta. Um, and I don't know how we got here in the Q&A, but somebody mentioned something like 23andMe, and I'm like, "Oh God, never use those." Like, and this is again 2017. Fast forward some years later, they're bankrupt and they're bought by private equity, and who knows how private equity is now going to use people's genetic data, right? And even during their existence, they did, questionable things like make a Spotify playlist based on your DNA. Truly, they did. I'm like, "What?" And so they were trying to market it, right? So we have seen this. So the latest is, people pointing out, there's this like TikTok trend. There were two TikTok trends. Like, sorry to be like so chronically online, but it's just interesting. Like, what I will take a step back and say one of the most interesting things to me is that you know, a lot of this narrative is being pushed by regular people to regular people. What I love is that it is not coming from me, the quote unquote expert, lecturing people from, my space of like, I do this all day, every day. What I love is seeing just regular people saying, this seems suspicious. I'm so glad to see that because they're stating it in a way where it's like, hey, I'm a normal guy and I'm telling you, a normal person, to do this, right? Um, there are so many memes that are like, you 10 years ago or something like that. And people have pointed out that that can be used to train databases, like whether it is or it isn't. But, the one I alluded to earlier, very specifically, many of us, myself included, in literally a time so long ago in our heads that it seems like a different millennia, played Pokemon Go. And it was actually a very beautiful thing. I loved Pokemon Go. What I loved was seeing how many families were out and kids were, engaging with people in this very friendly way. And even I would have said, "Oh, it's just a game." Like, I used it. Well, hey, cool. Now we find out that Niantic has sold all of that data. That data is being used to literally, map out surveillance in the United States. So you played an innocent game. I play this innocent game in like 2016. That data lives forever and ever. And over a decade later, it's being used with a technology that didn't exist at the time for an incomprehensible evil. And those are not like exaggerated words.
It's such a sad development because I have the same kind of fond memories as you do. Like I was out there 10
Yeah,
years ago catching Pokemon, and it was like in some ways it was like a golden age. Like it just felt so
it was
carefree and like
amazing.
yeah,
It
and to then
truly, yes.
yeah. Yeah,
Oh, sorry,
weaponizing
go
that
ahead.
is I was just gonna say, like, the fact that it's been, like, weaponized is really, really depressing. But I wanna come back to, these TikTok trends you're talking about, and specifically,
Mhm.
I wanna ask you about TikTok because TikTok is not a neutral player in this, right?
It is
They've
not
got
a neutral
an
player.
they have an algorithm, they push content. There's, not even to get into the geopolitics of TikTok, but
Mhm.
I'm curious your posture around a tool like TikTok, whether it's TikTok, whether it's some of its competitors. Um,
Yep.
do you recommend people use it? Should they not use it? Can they use it ethically or in an informed way? What should our relationship be with some of these tools?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what you're pointing at is like the exact manifestation of like just lacking agency. So I struggle in general with my relationship with social media, like in general. So back in the beautiful days of Twitter, was just hyper online. The entire field of responsible AI was built by people snarking on Twitter. That's how we all met each other. And not just snarking, that's how we read each other's papers. It's how we interacted, right? Like there were not a lot of us that did this work when I first got started in 2017. There's still not even a lot of us. Everyone's everywhere. It was beautiful. And I moved from being hyper online or hyper on Twitter to just not having a social media presence at all. I don't even really post on LinkedIn. But the reality is, so much of the public discourse does happen on social media platforms. At the same time, I do see how, again, like now that I would say I've been, like, pretty much offline other than, like, very short stints on, like, LinkedIn or, like, playing around with TikTok since, my team and I all got fired. Like, for me, it was a principled stance that I'm not gonna be on X. Why would I be there and, you know, have my data and my attention support this platform? So, like, I am of 2 minds. Like, it's hard for me to answer your question because, like, you're hearing my struggle in real time, right?
Mhm.
Where I'm like, okay, there's this need as a professional, especially a public professional, to be on these environments, be on this platform. On the other end, like, we also know, just to bring in another narrative, that a lot of the news media is now captured by billionaires, and we actually consider a lot of media to be untrustworthy. And social media has traditionally proven a place where you can try to find more objective sources, right? So it's like all of these moving parts together. One is like lack of trust in centralized media institutions. Not that social media isn't that, but it's another version of that, right? So there's that. There is like what we know to be this necessity of being online to just be aware of what's happening in the world or maybe even engage with your community of practice. And then there's this like evil that we know exists, right? And how do you reconcile the three? I wish I had an answer because I don't. Like I wish I could just say it is unethical to use these platforms. Well, I can say that, but then I cannot in good faith say, therefore, don't use any of them ever. Because I do think it's fair to say that, if you're a professional, for example, my community now exists on LinkedIn, and I don't really go on LinkedIn very much. Is that detrimental to me? Maybe. I don't know, because I can't measure the opportunity cost, right? I have no idea what the opportunity cost is. If I was chronically posting, would I be interacting with more people? Would I have more knowledge? Would more consulting or speaking opportunities come my way? Maybe, probably, right? I don't I don't know. But yeah, it's kind of a convoluted answer to your question because like I said, you're hearing real time what goes on in my
Mhm.
head constantly whenever someone sends me a LinkedIn post or whatever.
Well, and what I did hear, and it made me reflect on, is just how much of a bummer it is that a lot of these platforms used to be a place for independent discourse, not owned by, megacorps, and they've been
Yep.
absorbed. And it feels like, I'd like to think a few years from now we'll have some next wave somewhere else where we can have these discussions that's independent again, because it just feels like we're in between and it's been usurped from us, right?
I hope so. And actually I think there is a way that, one can use AI tools in the way so like I've been playing with Perplexity Computer lately. And I would say the joy that it brings to me is very similar to like when I was in high school and the internet was like kind of this thing we were all learning. And like if you like remember who you were at the time that the internet kind of became a thing, and if you were interested in it, you're like, wow, I can learn anything. I can meet anyone. Like as like suspicious as all of that is, right? But there is a genuine like purity to it, like you said, and also like a joy to knowing that like information access at your fingertips. And I have felt like that playing with some of the agentic AI apps. And I like spent a couple of days like just like setting up dumb things, right? Like send me a daily email with all of the ebooks on sale for Kindle and the genres that I like. And like that has really brought me so much joy. I probably spend more on ebooks now because that thing is actually particularly good. But there is this like way of using these tools where it's not about them telling you what to think or feel or what you need, but how we are then building, which is again like kind of the mindset of the early internet. I think the difference here is the internet was free for us. Now we have to pay for tokens, which that's the part where it's like, oh, but you have actually robbed us of like a public good. And like that's how it's different. But like the mindset and the feeling I have is similar. But again, like
That's
another very difficult thing for me to reconcile.
No, no, and I appreciate that it's not clean and it's not as simple as just don't use these tools. Given your perspective and your experience, and again, I'm just kind of reflecting on what you were saying about that, and to me, one of the other differences in my mind, and I'm curious on your thoughts, is that the internet was, um, how do I want to frame this? Like the internet was more neutral in the sense that you could go
Mhm.
on it and you really had full agency or close to it of what you're looking for. And these
Yep.
platforms and these algorithms in some way take that agency away from you because
Yep.
they are pushing you towards specific experiences. They want you to consume in a certain pattern. They want you to consume certain stuff. And so it feels like you have to be a lot more intentional about how you use these tools if you're going to maintain that agency.
Yeah, and to some extent it's exhausting because
Mhm.
you, to your point, constantly have to pay attention to like, am I being manipulated in some way, right? Is this information real? And I think an analog way of thinking about it, or a semi-analog way, is like how we don't just look at the New York Times and Washington Post and say, "Oh, that's the news." We're like, "Oh, that's the thing that Bezos owns. So of course they feel like this about this." And let me go online and find if three other sources are talking about the same. We now have a lot more work we have to do. We cannot approach it as innocently. And to your point, like, one of the things that came up in discussion in Twitter amongst Twitter leadership, and I can't really name names, was kind of like the sentiment that it was unfair that social media companies were under all of this scrutiny to do content moderation because we never content moderated the internet. And just to give you an example, like Nazis are allowed to have websites, but Nazis are supposed to be banned on social media. So like not to say that anybody wants Nazis, but to say that like the rules seem to have applied
Mm.
differently because but again, I think it's because the internet was born as this tool of free access to information that nobody owned and nobody paid for, or at least people do pay for it, but like not in the way that like we are directly putting dollars into specifically accessing information.
I wanted to go back to this, this experience you had at Twitter. And for listeners who don't know, you were a leader on the machine learning, ethics, transparency, and accountability team at Twitter. And I'll ask you this in a deliberately broad way, but can you tell me a little bit about kind of your reflections on that time and what you were trying to achieve and what it taught you?
Yeah, so it's worth also thinking through like structurally where I was in the company. There have been many teams that do this kind of work, sort of infamously or famously at places like Google. There's still some at Microsoft, et cetera. My team at Twitter, at least for its time, was very unique. I was an engineering director and I sat on this team called Cortex, which is basically, if you know the structure of Twitter, it's where all of the machine learning and AI services were offered. So there are teams that own products, like a product could be like who to follow, right? And the core tools that they use to build who to follow came from the team that I was on. Why is that important? It is important, and that's why I actually, in some ways, I took the job, is because I was in the room with people building it, so I didn't have to ask permission. My colleagues and my peers were not policy, and there's nothing wrong with like policy, et cetera, but you're not in product. And to me, if you're in product, if you're in that room, then you have access and privileges that people on other kinds of teams have to fight for, right? So if you're a responsible AI team as a pure research team, you don't own product and you don't influence product. Or if you want to, you have to fight for it to happen. Whereas I am just in the room. And when there was an engineering meeting, I am just in that room because these are my peers. That's really important to like shaping how the tool is being built from design. So I loved it. And also the other thing I'll say about Twitter is somehow it kept that like weird, very millennial 2000s startup-y vibe, Like it's so corny, but like in the best way possible. It was a very corny company, but I loved it. And I one thing I will say about a lot of Twitter employees, most Twitter employees, like we knew we had a really difficult task and we knew we weren't going to get it right. And one of the things I loved about Twitter is they owned their mistakes, right? I think that's kind of what Twitter was famous for, is when Twitter would go down, they're like, sorry, like we done messed up. And that was, and I loved that. And around when I was interviewing was when um, there was, like citizen data science around potential algorithmic bias in the image cropping algorithm. I don't know if you remember this, but basically people realized that it seemed like the Twitter image cropping algorithm was cropping out darker skinned people. And, it
Mm.
had already by then been demonstrably shown that these models underperform for people who are higher on the Fitzpatrick scale, so darker skin tone. So instead of doing what a lot of other companies do, which is sort of hide behind PR narratives, you had Dantley and Parag. So Parag was then the CTO, Dantley was then head of product, I believe, hopping in and being like, hey guys, what are you seeing? Like, can you tell us about it? Like, I want to learn, and they were very open, they were very responsive to criticism, and they promised to do something about it. And then they did, which is again so rare in general and so rare these days. And more as like we have become, there's like now this elite ruling godlike class of AI CEOs. I can't imagine these people having the kinds of interactions that Parag and Dantley had like 4 years ago. I don't see them doing that in an honest and open way. I could see them snarking. I could see them belittling people on social media. I don't think I can imagine them coming in and earnestly asking about a product flaw and trying to learn how to fix it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, sorry. The reason I'm just like pausing and reflecting on that is I feel like it's like you can draw an arrow from that statement right back to the start of this conversation about what's going on in big tech and
Yeah.
also about the market in terms of consumers, not the market in terms of investors. That's a whole other story that we can or cannot talk about. But this distrust in the products and in the tech is the leadership style. Like it feels like leaders are deliberately putting up those walls in a way that maybe they didn't 10 years ago. And I don't know, is that going to hurt them in the longer term? Is it going to pay off? It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I think that sort of dodging and obfuscation does not in the long term benefit any CEO. I think maybe in the short term it helps them because they get to avoid problems. One of the best books, I would argue probably the best book in the space to understand like this, like you said, it comes full circle, is Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which like you really like you could literally only, it's a very big book. It's like literally 3 inches thick, but you could just read the first chapter. And what she does beautifully is outline the strategy and the economic model of Silicon Valley, right? And part of that strategy is like playing this waiting game, right? Waiting until we as a public get exhausted with a topic. And the example she gives, something that I personally had forgotten, which was that when Google Maps first came out, people were up in arms about it. They were really upset, and people were protesting. They were stopping the cars. They were building higher fences. And Google did not say or do anything about it. They just kept their mouths shut, and what they waited for was for the momentum to die down. And I don't think any of us question, the Google recording
Mm.
cars that we see driving around from Maps anymore. And like that really made me pause and reflect on actually how good that strategy can be. But I think again, AI it is just so different. It's again so much less abstract. It is, especially with generative AI, it's in our hands, it's in our faces. We're seeing it play out real time. We're seeing it play out in a genocide. We're seeing it play out in the field of war. We're seeing it play out, with protests, right? And again, like the technological and the political are the same thing now. That I don't think that strategy works. I don't. I think people are too smart now. I think there was a lot of naivete that we are now past. And I'm glad. I'm glad people are not naive about it anymore. But what they have now removed is our ability to make decisions, right? So one of the other studies of the many studies that point out how people don't want AI products is I think one consumer study showed that product labels that said they had AI were purchased 74% less. And then if they drop the label, so now they just drop the label, they don't drop the AI, right? So like they take the wrong thing away.
So there's a few different avenues I want to take here, but maybe let's start with us as consumers. Like if we want to be more ethical about it, if we want to, be building a better future here, like what do we do? Like what's our
Mhm.
kind of imperative, and how should we be
Yep.
thinking just about how we interact with these products? And I mean, you said it yourself, like
Yep.
it's not clean. It's not necessarily just,
Yeah,
throw out your phone.
it's not, and I think those are like very trite things to say, and they're often born of an immense amount of privilege. Like I realize that I have an immense amount of privilege being able to just not be online. Like I was literally thinking
Mhm.
about this morning. Actually, I was talking to my friend about this morning. My friend is a doctor, and she said to me, Raman, I wish I had the energy to go build a brand. Why does a medical professional need to build a brand? They do now, right?
Fair.
Medical professionals feel that because she is one of the dying breed of, small business owners. She has her own practice. And she now has to think not just about taking care of patients, but about building an online brand because that is what drives patients to your door, which is, by the way, I think ridiculous. I think that's a ridiculous state of affairs. So I was reflecting on like how I am privileged that I don't have to be chronically online and thinking of building a brand in order to feel like I can get ahead, right? So like, so what can people do? Which is always a great question. I think number one is one of the things about not being chronically online, even though I'm somewhat like I use social media as a way of understanding like social movements and how people are thinking about things. Use it as an observational tool. Um, I think one of the things I've realized from not being like on Twitter all the time is that is how much we get caught up in like local maxima and minima. And what I mean specifically is that like there are attention cycles that are very short and seem incredibly consequential at the time that you then realize really didn't matter. I know there's a lot of stories that I miss and a lot of like main characters online that I miss, but actually it doesn't impact my life. So I think one is just like not being fooled by the moment, like the local minima, and seeing the big picture. I will also add that, by the way, a lot of this very aggressive do it now or else narratives about AI are actually meant to make you not plan long term, not like think deeply. It's meant to make you run around scared and not be strategic. So, my advice in general, but also as it relates to technology, is like think strategically about what will serve you, not and don't make fear-based decisions. What do I mean by that? Like my intent of like using computer, for example, which is an agentic tool built by Perplexity, was very intentional. And I have been experimenting with it to think about what I want to use it for and not use it for, versus the hype around OpenClaw a few weeks ago, which was to me insane, that people were like, I'm going to give it access to my bank accounts and it's going to bet on Polymarket for me. I'm like, why don't you build something dumb, like, as I said, a daily email with Kindle recommendations before you go giving your bank account information to it, right? So, like, you need to figure out what your relationship with this technology will be. So, yeah, I think that's my big advice is like think strategically, think about how it serves you versus it being based on FOMO or fear or I'm going to lose my job or whatever else story that is being pushed to make us too scared to ask questions.
I really like that, and it ties into something that you said earlier, which I was a little bit surprised by, but made me happy. Which is you said that there's when you use some of these tools, there's joy in it for you, right? Like you're actually able to use these in a deliberate way and find joy. And so is that basically your advice around this? Is the secret to finding joy in this stuff is being strategic, being intentional, and starting with how do I want to use this versus how am I expected to use this? Maybe.
Yes, I think you framed it absolutely perfectly. It's literally like how do and this goes back to agency, right? And so much of what I've done over the past few years, and I would even argue maybe like this has been the arc of my career. It was the topic of my TED talk for sure, is how do we give people agency? Because with agency we make choice. When we make choices, we're actually happier with the outcomes. I think part of this, like dissatisfaction people feel, maybe even isn't how the tool is performing, but the fact that nobody bothered to ask us. Nobody bothered to say, "Do you want this?" Like I don't have kids, but I imagine parents trying to mediate technology and their children are irritated by the technology, not necessarily because they don't like technology, but because they were given no option and now they have all this responsibility for something that they didn't choose to do. And a good, and that's a good way to think about it, right? It's not that people don't want responsibility, it's that we wanna make a choice to have a responsibility, right? If you think of, like, let's say a hobby that you have, like, people who are, let's say, like, marathon runners, they will wake up at absolutely wild times and go run for 13 miles. But if I were to say, "Hey, you have to wake up for work at 4:30 AM tomorrow," they would be irritated to do the same. Why? Because they'd say, "Why? I did not make that choice." So to your point, part of me finding joy in using sort of more hands-on agentic tools is that I get to decide what it's being used for. I get to decide what problem it's solving. And by the way, I'm starting to see that arc with more of the tech tools that are being, I think before they were trying to tell us what we wanted to use it for. And a great example, by the way, are calendaring apps or any sort of like AI assistant type apps that really don't do very well because they are so prescriptive. They make these broad assumptions of what you want. So I personally have never found one that works for me because I travel a lot. So if I had a Calendly, then like what happens is I end up with calls at 2 in the morning because unless I'm constantly going in and updating what times which is a lot of work for me, then it's just not gonna work. So they have not thought through things like that, or at least not given someone like myself the tools to do that easily. So again, it's sort of this like generic prescribed use case being shoved on us, and that's what people are rejecting. And what does it look like to just like let go of some of the power and maybe let us do stuff, like let us drive the car for a bit?
It's it's really interesting, and I'm absorbing so much here, and I'm thinking about it, and yeah, I'm trying to zoom out and think about what this cycle looks like, and the fact that we've got the backlash, we've got this big push by big tech, and the phrase that came to mind, and I haven't thought about this before, but it's good branding, is that it feels like there's a war on agency, like a war on human
Mhm,
agency of like,
mhm.
no, you don't think about it, you let us think about it for you,
Yep,
which is
that's
in
right.
direct opposition with us feeling a sense of joy or pride or
Absolutely,
accomplishment. And
absolutely.
so if we agree that that's true, how optimistic are you that this is getting better versus worse? Like, where is this going? Do you think we're going to get an inflection point and it's going to be similar to what you said about groups on Twitter, and people are going to say, no, this is bullshit, I'm taking back my own agency, and kind of forcing organizations to come with them? Or, is it going to be the opposite, and we just, as people, go more toward that like Wall-E future of just,
Yeah.
turn off my brain? Or secret option
Um,
C.
yeah, I mean, I think my answer to that would like change on an hourly basis, depending on like what fresh nonsense I may have seen online or what's going on. Uh, Here's what I want to believe, and actually I do believe, like what like, and it's I think again back to these like constant battles I have in my own head. I constantly wonder if like me existing in this space is actually a bad thing of people like myself, right? Because, you know, like people like me are not tech abolitionists, even if they use the language of tech abolitionism, right? Because to truly be a tech abolitionist, like that means you're just literally disengaged from all of it. And often I do wonder, like, what would I do if I just literally just like, completely actually did throw my phone into the ocean? Like that is a lifestyle change I've seriously considered, right? And I wonder if the existence of people like myself is futile, right? Because we're making it seem we're giving window dressing when there's a fundamental problem, right? So the reason I still do this every day is actually I do believe in the human condition and that that human beings want and need things like agency and ownership, and at some point we'll fight for it and we'll make it happen, whether they're fighting for it with their dollars, whether they're fighting for it, in Congress by trying to pass bills. You see more and more young people running for office and running for office on specifically tech platforms. Like it is very fascinating to me. I live in Texas, that we can have candidates in Texas that can run on issues of like data privacy, and the population, their constituency understands what it means. I think that's a great thing. So I do believe, and the thing is the wheels of democracy move more slowly than the wheels of autocracy, right? So one example I use constantly actually is Elon Musk. And it's unfortunate that that man has actually failed at many, many things. Many of the things he has tried to do, much of the harm he has tried to inflict, he has actually failed at. And the problem is when he does it quickly. He fires half of Twitter illegally. He, hops into the US government, hires a bunch of babies, and they wreak havoc. And happens like overnight, very fast, right? But the wheels of democracy do turn because guess what? He lost the lawsuit against Twitter employees. He also lost the lawsuit against Tesla employees when he did something very, very similar. Doge, like a judge just ruled that many of the actions that Doge did were incorrect and, not actually permissible because they were never congressionally approved. The problem is that took 2 years to happen, right? The Twitter lawsuit took 3 years to happen. And the wheels of democracy move slowly. So maybe it is not in this like sort of social media driven, short attention span world. Back to like, let's think of the meta picture and the big picture strategy. If you're paying attention to the big picture, you'll see that like a lot of these things are not particularly successful over time. In the immediate, they seem very successful. So yeah, I think that people, and I not even want, I need to believe, right? I actually literally need to believe because that is what keeps me going at this job. I need to believe that people are going to do the right thing.
Well, and your case for optimism is pretty compelling, and I like your point that it requires zooming out sometimes, and it requires getting beyond, the media cycle. And I mean, the media and their complicitness in this is a whole other conversation. And I mean, like, I should acknowledge again that like even us by having this conversation, we are part in some way of that landscape. Um, but it's a compelling case for optimism that there's just the stories you don't hear, and what that means in terms of safeguards to what we want in our society.
Yeah, and again, it's just like I have not seen in the almost 10 years I've been at this job, people become smarter and demand more and demand better. Just again, anecdotally, this is before I even worked in responsible aids. Field didn't even exist. I remember a while ago, like Google had done this thing in Mountain View where they took these mosquitoes and they had synthesized something to help prevent, I want to say West Nile virus. Um, and they just sort of released these mosquitoes after just injecting them with the thing. And at the time, this was like in like peak tech optimism. Everyone's like, wow, Google, amazing. And I'm like, did this get FDA approval? And like just like thinking through like, but again, the predominant narrative was just so optimistic, like, oh my God, Google, they're going to cure West Nile virus by stopping the mosquitoes. I don't think that narrative would fly today, right? I think today people would be like, excuse me, why is Google like doing biological experiments on people? You could not ask those questions 10 years ago that you can, like, well, more than, sorry, I'm dating myself, more than 10 years ago,
Yeah.
that you can ask it. I love that. I am always happy to see like citizen movements. So there's this um article by Rebecca Solnit that I absolutely love, and it's actually I would say probably one of her least known articles. And I love reading Rebecca Solnit because she straddles that kind of critique and optimism that I think we need. And this article is called "When the Hero is the Problem," and the purpose of the article is to talk about how we really want to show this like individual hero, and all of Silicon Valley is built on this, the child genius who dropped out of Harvard and single-handedly built whatever, right? And what she points out is actually the reality is that most progressive movements, most positive for humanity movements were built by collectives. And what she reflects on is how hard it is for her to pitch a story or write a book
Mhm.
because we as society are so enamored of the hero. But she's like, there is no one person that solves a problem. Collectives solve problems. And I like to think about that when I like to think about what does it look like to push back against centralization of power. It is a collective movement. So we're not going to have a hero. We're not going to have a single person. What we'll have is a lot of people just getting really fed up and just stopping. And maybe they'll stop in their own little way, but like that will mean something when it's all summed up and all put together.
So I'm going to ask you a question that might be unfair, and so feel free to answer it as you see fit. But in this landscape of AI and consolidation of power and big tech and you know collective movements and responses to this stuff, what what is the role of the AI ethicist or of responsible AI? Where do you see yourself and your mission into fitting in this broader picture? And how much of it is it, with consumers or organizations? And how do
Yeah.
you how do you roll that boulder uphill, or something slightly more positive to make sure that
No,
we're contributing for good here?
yeah, I mean, I don't think that's an unfair question at all. I think it's a great question. I think there's sort of two questions in your question. One is like, what is the AI ethicist role? And then the second one was like, what am I like?
Hmm.
What do I see as my role? I think those are two. I think about the second one constantly. What is the AI ethicist role? I think what I like is that, people have fallen into different categories, right? I think there are the people, and a lot of people fall in the space where it's about like informing people, right? I do think there is still a role of constantly informing. I think informing can be a double-edged sword. I think, base like critique without any path forward is actually alienating and disempowering. And I think there are people in the responsible AI community that I wish would learn that. Um, I'm trying to be like very careful with my words here, but I think there is like, yes, we should be raising awareness, but like people cannot walk away feeling hopeless, right? Um, and I think there are people who do that amazing. Well, Karen Howe, it just comes to mind immediately, right? Like she as a journalist comes into this as somebody who is good at telling a story, explaining things. That's why Empire of AI is so powerful. But what's great is you don't leave that book feeling disempowered, right? She focuses on positive movement. So and that's a good example of awareness raising. Second is there are kind of the builders, and I put myself in kind of the builders category. It's, and builders, by the way, are not just tech people. There's a lot of lawyers who are builders. One thing I love is seeing like this legal community popping up. And, if I could, go back in time, one degree maybe I would think of getting would be a law degree, because I think tech law is one of the most fascinating places to be. And there's so much ground to cover with like rights and protections, and to be informed and capable in the space is one of the most powerful tools you can have. So I love seeing privacy professionals, like legal tech people popping up to say like these are your rights, or they're going to advocate for rights. The third group of people within the builders are, auditors and people who are making tools, right? And that is also a very, very powerful space to be in. So so now we're on the like, what do you, Ramon, see yourself doing? So one of the purposes of Human Intelligence, the nonprofit, was to build a community of practice of independent evaluators. And one of the things that the problem that I want to tackle, that I've been tackling for the past few years, is, how do we get, again, back to agency? How do we get people who are lived experience experts, or experts that are not influenced by tech companies, i.e. literally paid for on a tech company's dollar to do this work, and not just interested in this work, like legally protected, certified, that it's a viable, it needs to be a profession. Professions don't fall out of the sky. They happen because there are certain things that enable it. So what I'm working on now with the Public Benefit Corporation of Human Intelligence is the infrastructure to do that work. How does somebody, let's say, you're interested in to being an evaluator, maybe you even have some consulting work. How do you do this work efficiently? How do you do it well? So I see it as like problems to tackle. The other part I'll add is, there's so much like symbiosis between all of these people, right? So the tech legal people know that they're not technologists, and then they'll go to people like me to say, hey, if we're trying to write a law that says your models should be audited, what can we and can we not ask for companies to give and do, et cetera. So like we're all calibrating. So I think there's it's just such a deep, and I have not even tackled like cybersecurity,
Mhm.
right? Which also is intersecting with the space immensely, which I would argue is probably one of the most lucrative and future-proof fields to go into. The other part I'll add, by the way, with all of the hysteria and concern at the moment about the future of work, I see all of these jobs ranging from cybersecurity all the way to like informing people about it, as these are like AI proof jobs. Like AI cannot come to do this work because it fundamentally needs human judgment. It needs collaboration. It needs synthesis. It needs historical understanding. It needs so much stuff that AI literally cannot do.
We've sort of backed. There's so many threads I want to pull on there. So thank you, Ramon, for that comprehensive answer. But we kind of backed into future of work there. Cybersecurity is kind of interesting in some ways. I work with a lot of IT professionals, and some aspects of cybersecurity are actually the first to be automated, because you're doing, kind of automated threat detection, which is very different from the judgment
Mhm.
piece about designing cybersecurity work. But maybe again, just more broadly, can you give me any sort of um, from your perspective, just view on the future of work and what it's going to look like over the next handful of years as some of these, AI powered tools kind of, I was going to say, infiltrate more workplaces. Maybe that's too judgmental a word, but as we start to, rewire organizations with AI.
Yeah, so actually just did this show called Open to Debate on this topic specifically. So it's something I actually have been thinking a lot about, and it sparked me to think more about even just the idea of human intelligence and what does it mean to be an intelligent person. I find it fascinating from like a philosophical perspective and a practical perspective. So there's like, just to go into the practical one, like so much of this is the hype cycle at play, and the hype cycle is meant to be disempowering, right? Again, hopping in and saying all jobs will be automated in the next 18 months is such a ridiculous and unfounded thing to say. And like, but then why, right? Because you cannot adjust your life to something that is going to completely decimate it's as if like somebody pointed out that there is a meteor about to hit the planet Earth in the next day and we're all going to die. Like there's nothing for you to do, right? There's nothing you cannot plan and execute on a time frame that is that short, right? But instead, like, but that's not the reality. The reality that we are seeing, that, and again, like this is why this like getting caught up in the local maxima or minima is dangerous, is if you're caught up in that story, then you're missing the real story, which is actually that we are experiencing a lost generation of young people who cannot get jobs. Entry level jobs are increasingly harder to get, especially in fields like programming, right? But that annoyingly is a problem that you can actually tackle, right? If you have like narrowed your scope to people graduating with certain kinds of degrees who are trying to enter the job market, that is something maybe we can build something around. But if we are then all going bananas because we think none of us will have a job, people are going into self-preservation mode. Why would somebody as a senior engineer try to build, opportunities for young people entering the job market if you as a senior engineer are being told that you're going to be out of a job, right? So this is like a perfect example of how it's disempowering. So like one, I do not think jobs will all disappear, but two, I think that there are certain fields that are being automated away right now. I think it is happening slowly but surely. And I think that three, because this time frame is not like happening tomorrow, we can actually plan for it. Again, if we like take a look at the long-term picture, we actually can plan for the next 3 to 5 years on, how are the kids who are sophomores in college today going to be able to be successful in the job market, right? That is a different question from saying, how can a kid who's graduating this year be successful in the job market? And again, these are actually problems we can tackle, right? So one thing, I love is that the CEO of Reddit has said, actually, we're leaning into hiring young people because, we think we can figure out roles for them. Amazing. But the fact that he even pointed out and is thinking of the problem to be solved as young people needing jobs, right? That's a framing that not everybody understands right now. The other thing I'll add is there's also increasing empirical evidence, which I'm glad to see, on how work is being integrated and how it's successful and not successful. There's so many papers coming out. Eric Brynjolfsson has had quite a few. There's like others that have come out of like Harvard and MIT. And like generally, the trend that we're kind of seeing is that you still need expertise. And maybe if there's another theme other than agency, this whole conversation that I'd like to bring up, it's discernment. I think that, having the ability to discern good and bad output, appropriate and inappropriate uses of technology actually requires expertise. So it's almost like counterfactual, right? Or not counterfactual. Yeah, it is counterfactual, right? Where like the existence of this technology actually means you need more experts, but it's automating away the junior level roles that would then allow someone to become an expert, which by the way, a lot of senior engineering people are saying. They're like, well, you need to hire junior people, even if an AI can do their job, because I'm not going to be here forever. And this AI tool is not as great as you think it is. And you need my level of discernment to understand what is good and bad and what is right and wrong. So and I would apply that to social media. I would apply that to our consumption of these tools. I think other than agency, my other big word of the day is discernment.
I really like that word too, and I like the kind of the framing of why it's useful and why being an expert is, in some ways has more value than what's obvious or being communicated in some of these headlines. I want to come back to something. One of the themes here about by framing these problems better, we can actually tackle them. We can come up with a plan. We can do something about it. I want to push on the word "we." Who do you see as being kind of the key actors in the "we"? Is it business leaders? Is it political? Is it just
Mhm.
us as everyday consumers? Who holds the power here? And do you have any specific advice to the people who you think have the most outsized roles in correcting some of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we was sort of used very broadly, but you're absolutely correct to say, well, who is we in different situations? I think like, it depends on what we are talking about, right? So there is a we that is the average consumer when it comes to like picking and choosing whether or not you want to download an app or, buy the new Alexa or, enable Siri on your iPhone. Like there is a we that is the average consumer. And I'm talking about actually all the things that I don't do. I've never bought an Alexa, don't plan on buying it. Siri is turned off on my iPhone. Like this actually as a consumer, like I did it on my parents' phone, like I can do that. Like these are capabilities you have as a person. Then there's this we that is like the technologist or the person in the room building the product or the tool. That is a very different we. And like as that individual, you have a lot more agency and ownership of what's being built, how it's being used, and again, like how the problem's being defined. And then the third is like there is a role for politicals. Actually, I think a lot of this like question framing, frankly, does lie in the hands of policymakers, not just Congress, but also like state and local policymakers. Um, you know, whoever is like, for example, the state lead for the Department of Education deciding on how AI should be. It could be a school board, right? There are these political decision makers that are, framing questions. When I say framing questions, this could even be what I said earlier, like we want to write a bill on auditing algorithms. What should that bill be? And just as an example, the current New York State law on hiring on requirements for hiring algorithms is so weak that a kid with an Excel tool could like pass it, right? So back when that law first came out, everybody was excited about the idea of it, but it got so watered down that actually it just became legal theater. And actually, worse, it created more responsibility for an individual to have to push back and say, actually, this algorithm did discriminate against me, even though it technically, quote unquote, passed the rules of this law. When I had been asked afterwards to help companies audit these algorithms, I would literally turn it down and say, you don't need me. You literally need an Excel sheet and a bunch of data from your database, and you can pass this, right? So framing the question, I think, is one of the most important tools for policymakers to do. They need to frame the right question the right way and then be able to frame the answer, because bad policy in many cases is actually, like the example I gave, is worse than having no policy at all, because bad policy then dumps the responsibility on us as the consumer. So whereas before, let's say if you were in New York State and you thought you were being discriminated against by an algorithm, there's a particular kind of like, onus you have of like having a court case and hiring a lawyer. Well, now your lawyer has another job, which is to say that the law itself did not adequately protect you, which is much, much harder to fight against than just saying a discriminatory algorithm being used by a company.
Right. Um, and as I think about that too, it thematically it seems to be tying back to that piece about discernment, right, and being able to frame these things correctly and understand it.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious. Um, you talked about the importance of framing, but are there any specific guiding principles you can share about how to best do that when we're talking about confronting this technology and its usage? Um,
Yeah.
and the lens we haven't gone to yet, by the way, that's on my mind is also with business leaders, how they should be adopting it, how they should be thinking about it. And so, what kind of guiding principles do you have for them or for any of the other kind of key actors in this space?
Yeah, I mean, for business leaders, it's actually always been kind of the same boring advice. It's just like, does this technology actually solve a problem for you? Or like a business need versus just being kind of a cool, like demonstrably so. So it's not like, yes, I would love to get rid of all of my employees because benefits are expensive, therefore I will introduce AI agents. Like, is an agent better than a person? By the way, every CEO that was out there, like CEO of Klarna, Salesforce, all crowing about how many people are in, they all have rolled their ass. Every single, not a single one has met the expectations that they were yelling about when agents were first coming out. My engineering lead just sent me an article today that actually MCP servers are being quiet. There's like a little bit in the weeds, but like MCP servers are supposed to be like the next big thing in agentic infrastructure. And everybody was told, gotta learn MCPs, like you gotta understand it, otherwise you're gonna be left behind. Funny how, and it actually comes from Perplexity Computer. It's actually just built on REST APIs. Like it's very simply built. You did not need this. So like just to point out a couple of things, at a, let's say, a business leader level, agentic AI is going to take care of my workforce. Well, it doesn't. It's not demonstrably proven it can do that. So before you're jumping into it, is it solving an actual problem? Is it capable of solving the problem? Does it solve that problem better than something analog, right? So the MCP example is actually it didn't solve a problem better than something analog, and actually probably introduced a whole raft of new problems. Because as I was talking to people about it, they're like, how do you handle versioning with an MCP server, right? If an MCP server is meant to like orchestrate a whole bunch of tools, what happens if like one like there's one tool in this chain that now has like some specific thing that's changed about it, and then everything is a cascading failure, right? Like it's less observable than your very traditional like REST APIs talking to a product and building a thing. Anyway, so like those are kind of my, it is a very boring answer, but it is like actually the thing people don't do.
No, I appreciate that, and the fact that people aren't doing it makes it that much more important, right? Like if it's, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that again, like just sort of for the general, I think people now increasingly understand, right, how much of this stuff is smoke and mirrors. But I think there was a belief that there's so many words that are thrown around that are actually Silicon Valley business jargon that to the average person sounds like something real and tangible that's just like made up math. So like valuation is a great example, like value. Oh my God, that's company is worth $1 billion. Is not like the average person thinks of this like money in, money out sense. So like, wow, if my local bakery were worth $1 billion, that means it's selling $1 billion of cookies. That is not what that means in Silicon Valley. It means that like it's like the price of art. This painting is only worth $1 million because someone's willing to pay $1 million. So it's not intrinsically worth that much. I think people are starting to realize this when they're saying that some company has this valuation of or this technology is capable of something. It doesn't actually mean it can do the thing or it's worth that much. It's a speculative discussion. There's a lot of like speculation being sold, which, morbidly, like one of my latest morbid interests is just like following the rise of poly market and sort of this legalized social gambling that's happening in this. It's kind of like a sick symptom of this like very speculative hype driven world that like it's like an Ouroboros. It's like this hype is eating itself, And I see Polymarket as like that or Kalshi. Like I'm not gonna like
Yeah.
discriminate. They're both awful. They're both this manifestation of like the snake eating itself.
Yeah, it's like meta hype in some way. It's like the hype of the hype. Can we bet on the hype? Like it's just
Correct.
it's yeah.
It's like when we all looked at NFTs and laughed, this is just like NFT as an entire completely gazillion dollar industry that is being integrated into every aspect of our lives. At least NFTs, like we're stuck in a corner and the
Yeah.
true believers got to go do what they wanted to do. Which by the way, the metaverse recently shut down $1 billion. A billion with a B. I don't think all of AI governance has spent $1 billion
Yeah. Yeah.
in
And
like
like,
its existence.
yeah. Well, and like who saw that coming? Like everyone, I think, who was
Only
paying attention.
everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
correct.
Yeah. So I want to be conscious of the time here as well. And I know Rumman, we've covered an awful lot of ground here. Any kind of final thoughts you want to leave listeners with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to go back to kind of these two themes that have clearly come up in this conversation. One is agency and two is discernment. And I think that applies to like actually every aspect of our lives because every aspect of our lives currently is digitally mediated. It is now our responsibility as a consumer to exercise those things, right? Figure out, what I do and don't have agency over and execute that agency and learn about how you can execute your agency. And two is like learn discernment, like what is good, what is bad, what is positive, what is negative. And again, like what I have seen very positively over the last 10 years in this field is that people have become more discerning about certain things. And then the agency part is the ability to execute on that discernment.
Yeah. Well, and that's exciting that it feels like there's some green shoots of more discernment and people, kind of fighting back against, the powers that be here.
Yeah, I think so. Like I said, just like as a cultural observer of social media, some of my favorite accounts are just like regular people. Like there's one that's actually now become copied by multiple different accounts, and it's this guy, and he looks a particular way, and he's like quoting one crazy thing a tech CEO said every day in 2026. Actually, three or four similar accounts, and every day it's like some fresh nonsense. But I love that it's just like some influencer meme talking to regular people. It's not me, it's
Yeah.
not an expert. It's just like literally an influencer meme. And I love that. I love that that exists because that's what changes the collective psyche.
Well, and can I just had a brainwave while you were talking, and I feel like it ties back into something you said a lot earlier. It feels like snark is actually a very powerful weapon against, the manipulators of power and the eroders of our agency.
Oh,
Because
I mean, like it's hard to tell. I was born in 1980, so I'm like a millennial Gen X person. We like live and die by snark. Like 100%, there is no better way to disarm somebody with a very fragile ego than to be snarky to them.
I love that. I love that. In defense of snark. Oh, that's awesome. Rumman, I wanted to say such a big thank you for coming on. This has been such an interesting conversation. I know you've given me a ton to think about, so I really appreciated all your insights.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you.
If you work in IT, Infotech Research Group is a name you need to know. No matter what your needs are, Infotech has you covered. AI strategy? Covered. Disaster recovery? Covered. Vendor negotiation? Covered. Infotech supports you with the best practice research and a team of analysts standing by, ready to help you tackle your toughest challenges. Check it out at the link below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.